After the divorce, the silence in my house echoed louder than any argument we'd ever had. I was still learning how to breathe again when my stepson Ethan asked. If he could move in, he had always been quiet, respectful, a shadow in the chaos of my failed marriage. I thought it would be healing for both of us. But as the days turned into weeks, subtle shifts began to disturb that peace. The way he looked at me lingered too long, the way I felt around him began to change. I never imagined what would follow, or what it would awaken in me. The first few weeks after the divorce were painfully quiet. The walls that once absorbed laughter and late-night arguments now sat still and cold like silent witnesses to a love that had withered away. I would wake up every morning reaching for a body that was no longer there. My mornings were routine, coffee, silence, and the echo of a marriage that had unraveled in slow motion. Then one afternoon, Ethan called. His voice cracked a little when he asked if he could come stay with me for a while. He said things had grown tense. With his father, I did not ask questions, I just said yes. When Ethan arrived, he stood at the doorway holding a single duffel bag, his expression unreadable. He was taller than I remembered, broader in the shoulders, his face sharper with age. We had not spent much time alone together during the marriage. He was my husband's son from his first marriage, and while we had always been kind to one another, there had always been a wall between us, a quiet formality, like distant relatives who happened to share a roof. I assumed this would be the same. We would be polite, respectful. He would heal, and I would too. Neither of us knew what healing truly meant. Yet the first few nights were uneventful. Ethan kept mostly to himself. He helped with the dishes cleaned up after dinner, and always asked if I needed anything before disappearing into the guest room. I appreciated the company. Even in its silence, there was something comforting about knowing someone else was in the house. The creaks in the floorboards did not feel so loud with him around. I started cooking more again, taking the time to prepare meals, rather than microwaving leftovers. There was something about feeding someone that made me feel human again, but slowly, almost without notice, something began to shift between us. It was in the way he lingered in the kitchen after dinner, leaning against the counter, while I cleaned up, watching Mew with quiet eyes that felt too steady. It was in the way he laughed slightly, deeper, fuller, at jokes I did not even realize I had made. I caught him looking, once not at my face, but lower, quickly, looking away. When I turned, I should have said something. Then I should have drawn a line, but I did not. Instead, I pretended I had not noticed, and he pretended nothing had changed. Then came the night. I wore the old gray sweater that hung off one shoulder. I had not worn it in years, but it had felt like a comfort in the cold evening air. Ethan's eyes met mine across the dinner table and held. Just a second too long. He said nothing, but I felt something coil tightly in my stomach. We never had. He told me about his mother, about how she left and never came back. He said my presence, even in the background of his life, had always felt warmer. I listened, unsure of how to hold the weight of that confession. I told him about my marriage, how it died. Not with a bang, but with a quiet distance that grew between us, like two continents drifting apart. He listened, nodding, his gaze heavy and thoughtful. One afternoon, I came home from the store to find him fixing the sink. His shirt was wet, clinging to his chest. I looked away quickly, muttering a thank you. He smiled and said, "You do not have to thank me. This feels like home now." The word home landed softly, but shook something loose inside me. I realized in that moment that I had not felt at home in a long, long time. The dream started after that. Vivid, tangled visions of Ethan and I. Our bodies pressed together. Our words no longer guarded. I would wake up breathless, confused, ashamed. I tried to shake them off, blaming, loneliness, vulnerability, grief. But every time he brushed past me in the kitchen or leaned too close while handing me a cup of tea, my body remembered. We began sitting closer on the couch under the guise of watching late-night movies. He would fall asleep, sometimes his head against my shoulder. The weight of it, both innocent and intimate. I would stay still for hours, afraid to move. Afraid of How much I wanted to stay like that. I began to notice the way he smelled. Clean warm, something like cedar wood and laundry detergent. The small things began to matter: how his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how his voice softened when hesked, how my day had been. It was dangerous, I knew it, but I was no longer sure if I cared. One evening while drying dishes, he placed his hand over mine to take a plate from me. It lingered just a second too long. I looked up. He did not look away. My heart pounded so loudly, I was afraid he could hear it. I stepped back, muttering something about going tobed early, but that night sleep did not come. I lay awake, staring at the shadows, dancing across my ceiling. My thoughts, stangled and restless days passed, and the tension only grew. It hung in the air like summer heat before a storm, thick, electrous, inescapable. We both felt it. I saw it in the way he looked at me now, not as a Stepson, not even as a boy, but as a man, seeing a woman. And I was no longer sure. I wanted to stop him from seeing me that way. I began dressing with more intention: soft blouses, light perfume, a touch of mascara. It was subtle, barely noticeable. But I caught him noticing the lines we'd never crossed. Suddenly felt blurred, and my conscience began to lose its voice to the louder hum of desire. I hated myself for it. I tried to rationalize. I tried to remind myself of the boundaries of the years that separated us, of the titles that once defined our connection, but something deeper was unfolding now, something neither of us could name. And then came the night everything changed. It happened on a Sunday night. The kind of night when everything outside was still: no traffic, no wind, just the kind of hush that feels like the world is holding its breath. I was in the kitchen wearing a soft robe and sipping the last of my wine, when Ethan walked in. His hair was damp from a shower, and he was wearing a plain white shirt and gray sweatpants. He looked relaxed, but his eyes were intense, focused. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching me as I loaded the dishwasher. There was something in his silence that made the room feel smaller, tighter. I felt it in the space between us, humming with unspoken tension. I tried to ignore it. I asked him if he had eaten, if he wanted tea, if he had spoken to his father lately. All the usual questions he answered with short, polite responses, but his eyes never left me. Finally, I turned around, drying my hands on a towel, and said, "You are being quiet a night." He nodded slowly and said, "I have been thinking." There was a pause that stretched too long. I asked, "About what?" And that is when he said it solo. I almost did not catch it. "About you. About us." The words dropped like a stone into still water. I froze. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure he could hear it. I looked at him, really looked, and saw no hesitation in his face, no fear, just longing. I opened my mouth to speak, to say something rational, to draw a line, but nothing came out. He took a slow step forward. Then another. "I know. This is not simple," he said. "But nothing about how I feel for you is wrong. It does not feel wrong to me." He was inches away now. I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. I could smell his shampoo, the faint scent of soap, and something purely him. I whispered, "Ethan, this is not." But he stopped me with a look. "It is not about what we are supposed to be," he said. "It is about what we are right nowhere." His fingers brushed mine just a touch, and my breath caught in my throat. It should have felt forbidden. It should have felt impossible. But in that moment, it only felt real. I stepped back, not out of rejection, but because I needed air. My thoughts were swirling, crashing into each other. I walked into the living room, hoping distance would clear my mind, but he followed. He sat beside me on the couch, close but not touching. I could feel the tension vibrating between us. It turned to him. "Do you know what you are doing?" I asked. "Do you understand the weight of this?" He nodded. "More than you think. You have been in pain, so have I. And maybe that is why We see each other clearly now, not as what we were, but what we have become. I did not speak for a while. My fingers were shaking slightly. I placed them on my lap to hide the tremor he reached. Houghton gently took one of my hands. It was warm, steady. I know you feel it too. He said you were just afraid to admit it. And maybe he was right. Because I had felt something blooming slowly over the past few weeks. Something dangerous. Something beautiful. I had tried to bury it, to smother it with guilt and logic. But there it was, alive and undeniable, pulsing in the quiet. Between our breaths, I turned toward him, and for a moment, we just stared. I saw the boy he used to be, and then I saw them, and he had become he. Leaned forward cautiously, giving me time to pull away. I did not. His lips touched mine softly, at first tentative, as if asking permission. And when I did not stop him, when I closed my eyes and leaned into the kiss, something inside me shattered, something old, tired, aching. The kiss deepened slow, and searching his hand moved to the side of my face, cradling it like something precious. I responded with a hunger I had not felt in years. We did not speak. Words would have ruined the quiet reverence of that moment. He stood, extended his hand, and I took it. We walked to my bedroom, not as stepmother and stepson, not as what we had been, but as two people who'd both been broken and were now leaning into something reckless, something soft in the dim light of my. We undressed, slowly, not rushed, not desperate. Every movement was deliberate. Reverent, he touched me like he had studied my body in silence, like he knew where my pain lived and how to soothe it. His lips traced the curve of my neck. His hands explored, with care, note, entitlement. My breath hitched as he moved down my body, leaving warmth in every place he touched. I felt worship scene needed. I arched toward him, me body no longer mine, but something fluid and full. Every caress felt like a confession. Every sigh a release. He whispered my name like a secret, as though just saying it carried weight, and I called his like an anchor, grounding me in a reality I never expected, but suddenly could not imagine living. Without time slowed, we moved together, not hurried, but patient, the kind of rhythm that only comes when two people are not rushing toward pleasure, but unraveling into each other. When it ended, we lay tangled in silence, his head resting on my chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my arm. I stared at the ceiling, tears slipping from my eyes, not from regret, but from the terrifying honesty of it all. He noticed. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. I nodded. "Yes. I did not know. I needed this, you." He held me tighter. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered. And I believed him for the first time in years. I believed someone meant it. But as we lay there, reality began to creep back, in slow and cruel. Morning would come. The world would expect explanations. We could not give judgment, would follow. People would never understand. They would see something twisted where we saw truth. I felt the weight of it pressing against my chest. I closed my eyes, trying to hold on to the warmth of that night, the peace of his arms, the calm in my heart, because I knew that whatever came next, nothing could take away what that moment had healed. Inside me, the morning after sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, like nothing had changed. But everything had. I awoke to the soft rhythm of Ethan's breathing beside me. His arm draped, gently, over my waist, his body warm and familiar against mine. For a few suspended moments, I allowed myself to feel safe, wanted whole. But reality returned with the weight of 1,000 bricks. I slipped out of bed, quietly careful not to wake him, wrapping myself in the same robe I had worn the night before, now clinging to my skin like guilt. My feet moved slowly across the floor, but my thoughts raced. What had we done? What did it mean? Could we pretend it never happened? Or was that already a lie I would never be able to keep in the kitchen? I stood staring out the window. my hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long gone cold. The silence of the house was no longer comforting. It was loud with everything unspoken with. The tension that clung to the air, like humidity before a storm. I heard his footsteps long before he reached Meath, and said nothing at first. He just stood behind me. His presence steady patient when he finally spoke. His voice was barely a whisper. "You regret it." It was not a question, it was a statement. Wrapped in disappointment and hurt, I turned to face him, my voice trembling. "No, I do not regret last night, but I do not know what to do with it now." Hen nodded, understanding more than I expected. He know it is complicated. I know how it looks, but I also know what I felt, and I know what I still feel. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the fight between his certainty and the burden of what we had become. He took a step closer. "You do not have to say anything yet. I just need to know it was real for you too." I looked up at him, tears burning the back of my throat. It was real, I admitted too. Real, that is the part that scares me the most. The following days passed, like shadows present but intangible. We carried on as if nothing had, shifted eating meals at the same table, sharing space like careful strangers. But every look lasted too long, every accidental touch lingered. The tension between us pulsed just beneath the surface, aching for resolution or release. I tried to distract myself with mundane things, laundry, grocery lists, work emails, but none of it could pull me far enough away from the memory of his hands, his breath, his voice calling my name in the dark. One evening he came home late. I was curled up on the couch, pretending to watch television when he walked in. His hair was windswept, his cheeks flushed from the cold. He looked at me, and something in his face softened. He sat across from me, elbows resting on his knees, fingers laced tightly as if holding backwards. "Have you told Agnon?" he asked. I shook my head. How could I? He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Neither have I, but I hate this." The pretending, the silence. I nodded slowly. It is not just about what happened. It is about what it awakened in me, something I had buried. For so long he leaned forward. Like what? I paused, my voice breaking before I spoke. The desire to be seen, touched, chosen after the divorce. I felt like a faded photograph, something people glanced at but never truly saw. But that night you saw me in that terrified memory. Than anything he reached out then, his fingers brushing mine. "You are not invisible to me, you never were." There were moments we wanted to repeat that night, to slip back into that shared warmth. But we were always interrupted, by fear, by conscience, by the sound of footsteps that were not there at night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, remembering the way he had whispered my name, how his lips had searched my skin like a man discovering something sacred. I acted for it again, but I also feared what it would cost us, him, me, everything. One night I broke down and found him on the porch, sitting with a blanket around his shoulders, staring into the darkness. I joined him, wrapping myself in my own silence, until I could no longer hold it in. "Ethan," I said, "what happens if we just keep pretending this never happened? What happens to us then?" He turned to me, his voice tired, but clear. "We become ghosts in our own house." I closed my eyes, feeling that truth land deep in my chest. "I do not want to lose you," I whispered, "but I do not know how to keep you either." He leaned in, his forehead resting against mine. "Then maybe we stop trying to name it, stop trying to control it. Maybe we just let it be, whatever it is for now." And maybe he was right. Maybe there was no label for what we had, no perfect explanation, just two people navigating complicated intimacy with bruised hearts and cautious hands. And though the world outside that porch remained unchanged, the space between us finally felt honest. Still uncertain, still fragile, but honest. The days that followed were quieter but no empty. There was a new kind of stillness between us, softer, gentler, like the hush that comes after a storm has passed. We did not speak of that night. Again, not directly. but it lived in the pauses of our conversations and the careful glances we exchanged over breakfast in the way. We moved around each other like two people who had learned the edges of one another's pain. Ethan started working longer hours and I started sleeping with the bedroom door closed again, not out of anger but necessity healing. I realized did not mean forgetting. It meant honoring what happened without allowing it to consume. The present one evening as we both stood in the kitchen cleaning up. After dinner he looked at me and said, "I do not regret anything, but I do not want to be something that makes your life harder." I reached for his hand and held it just for a moment. "You were something that reminded me. I am still alive, that was the truth." Whatever we had shared was born out of loneliness and comfort. Yes, but also something far more human, the need to be understood. Eventually, Ethan found his own place not far away. We still see each other. We still talk. And while nothing is the same, I carry no shame, only the complicated memory of a connection that broke something open in me I had long tried to keep buried.